We are live. Okay. Welcome, folks. This is the Joint Legislative Justice Committee, Joint Justice Committee. It's made up of both House and Senate members. This is our second meeting of this summer. We had a complete Zoom meeting back in June, and then this is our first meeting that we're being held both in person at the State House as well as some folks zooming in. So it is what we're going to call a hybrid meeting in terms of being in person, but also doing it on Zoom with some of our members and some folks who are testifying. So bear with us if we stumble a little bit. This is brand new. This medium is brand new to us. We are used to either all in person or all on Zoom. So this is a combination of both. So welcome. Welcome back. Folks, it's good to see everyone in person. And to see our two senators on Zoom feels pretty natural as well. And hopefully at our next meeting, you folks will be able to join us for that. We're going to start this morning with dealing with some housing contracts that DOC has awarded or not awarded. It was occurring back in May and June, and there's still some concerns about how the process worked and who received grants from DOC and who did not. I would like to start with David Demure from the Council of State Governments in the Justice Center. David's been working with us quite extensively on justice reinvestment and how this ties into those contracts that were awarded or not awarded for the type of housing for our offenders that are reentering. Should they be in a congruent housing situation or should they be scattered into separate living situations? So David, you were with us. Welcome.
Good morning.
To you in terms of the work that the Justice Center has been doing and how this type of housing ties in with the work that the Justice Center has been doing with the Department of Corrections and our justice reinvestment too.
Certainly. Good morning, Representative Emmons and committee. I just want to say that based on the way the Zoom is working, if there are questions from committee members, I probably will not be able to identify you in terms of responding. So forgive me if I do not do so. My name is David Demora. I am a senior policy advisor at the Council of State Governments Justice Center. I have been working in Vermont on various projects over the last, probably 6 or 7 years now, in different types of projects that Vermont has been doing. Vermont is one of the most progressive states that we have and that we work with in terms of the Council of State Governments Justice Center and JRI, or Justice Reinvestment Initiative. I do briefly want to, which I don't typically do, I briefly want to just mention kind of how I got to here. I've been at the Justice Center for about 11 years. Prior to that, I worked in the community for 35 years. I'm a clinician by training. I have run a rather large number of programs, including congregate living settings, including scattered site housing settings, including programs for folks with severe mental illness, substance use, and women and children's programs. So I have spent most of my life, if you will, working mostly in the field, though over the last 11 years now, I am working very little in the field and working with a lot of states in terms of what they're doing. I certainly can't speak to the specifics of DOC contracting that is outside of the scope. Scope of what we do at JRI. What I can talk about is the discussion of congregate housing versus scattered site housing, what that means, what's the literature telling us now, what have we been seeing over a course of many years now. And I'll do sort of the short form and the long form, but I'll keep this as brief as possible. The short form is, it is clear that the concept of congregate housing for most individuals is an outdated concept. The outcomes don't match the money put into it. When you look at a variety of studies in Colorado and Pennsylvania and Ohio, just to name three, what you find is that folks who go to congregate housing settings often have a higher failure rate, a higher rearrest rate, and less involvement with community services and greater problems in terms of gaining long-term housing. Now, having said that, it's not that there's no such thing as a need for certain congregate housing. There certainly is. There are small meaning 8 to 10 folks living within a facility or in a house that might have a severe mental health need and might need some real stabilization before moving. There are folks who might need other types of stabilization, and I certainly don't want to suggest that there's no room for that. But it really should not be, when you look at the literature, the majority of the programs that are being provided to people who are returning to the community. When we look at people who are put into scattered site housing of various types, you find a lower recidivism rate, you find lower technical violation rates, you find greater involvement with community services, whether that's mental health, substance use, general programming, et cetera, and you find slightly better outcome employments, and that varies dramatically depending on where you are. So that is still very early in terms of the research. This isn't an issue of bad people, to be clear. It's an issue of, and I'm old. I've been around for 45 years. At one point I ran a program that had 50 beds in it. If it were up to me, that program would not exist anymore. Not because of the people being bad, but because the science tells us it's a bad idea. And so what we did in the criminal justice system is that we stuck with a model longer than what the research told us works. Even when we look at small congregate settings, what we find is that they only work if, in fact, they follow all three of the risk, need, responsivity principles and have a highly skilled staff. The majority of programming that's out there, and I'm not talking about Vermont specific, I'm talking about the country, the majority of program out there, unfortunately, doesn't have those components, in part because they don't have the funding or the resources to be able to have when I say the correct folks, I mean the appropriately trained folks to be able to do that. And that's either because of resources in terms of dollars, not given enough money, or it's in terms of being in a rural area and the folks just don't exist. So when you look at what's happening at a national level, when you look at the studies by the national academies, when you look at the National Institute of Corrections recommendations, et cetera, it's clear that we are moving away from a majority congregate living concept and moving toward an independent, or independent meaning a single or double kind of living settings with supports built around them and with integration into excuse me, with integration into the community. I've said this in previous meetings, again, staying away from, I have no knowledge of specifics of contract issues. That's for you all to discuss, but conceptually, in terms of what it is that the department has put together, Dale and his team, and Derek and his folks, it's exactly where the science is telling us we need to be moving. It's exactly what the research is telling us makes an impact in terms of people's lives. And one of the key issues there, or two of the key issues, one, it improves community safety, because when you have less failure, you have a safer community. And those of you that suffered through phase one with me when I was working on phase one will remember that one of the things that we found was that one of the drivers of reincarceration in Vermont was failure in the residential settings. And again, this is not an issue of blaming the settings. It's an issue of a disconnect between who the population is you have, what they need, and what the services that existed as they did were providing. And so you had a large amount of not new crime, but technical violations driving people back. And in fairness, some of those technical violations were significant. I don't mean to downplay that, but nevertheless, the fact of the matter is that What we now know is that there are more effective responses for those things than simply terminating people from a program and sending them back to incarceration. So overall, I would have to say that Vermont is doing what now a number of other states, again, including Ohio and Colorado, just to name two, Texas actually as well, are doing, which is closely looking at the research, closely reviewing and revising what it is that they have been doing, not with an issue of blame, but with an issue of whoops. We have been purchasing aspirin when we need some other type of medication is the best way that I can put it. One of the things that sometimes happens is people say, well, that's all we have, so that's what we should do. And God forbid I get a serious illness. If I need a certain medication, it doesn't matter how much aspirin you give me, it's not going to help. It's not going to solve the problem. With that, I will stop because, again, my information for you has to do with what the research tells us, how JRI wanted to be certain that the department and the state was looking at that research and making determinations about programming so that they could lower the technical violation rate, lower people returning to prison, increase success in the community, increase public safety. Past that, in terms of other issues that may exist in terms of process, is beyond the Justice Center's role by all means.
I asked a couple of questions.
Sure, I'll go with Senator Sears first. And then Senator Brooke. Dick?
Yeah, given my career history, I would have several differences with your opinion on this, David, but be that as it may, I'm concerned about what behaviors will be ignored or tolerated in the community that may not, we get a lot of complaints as senators and representatives from constituents about certain behaviors that are going on in the community. And usually they don't come from people living in congregate situations. They live in people that are living in apartments or whatever, who are under probation, parole, or furlough, or some other status. So that's one concern of mine, what will be ignored and maybe get worse as it goes on. The second one is we're right now putting a tremendous amount of money into a congregate living situation for juveniles called, I forgot the name of it, but it's under Beckett. And is this true with juveniles as well? And should we be looking somewhere else to spend that $4 million or whatever it is that is contemplated a yearly cost of the Beckett program? And finally, what about substance abuse programs? Most of them are substance misuse programs. Most of them are centered on congregate living situations. We have a number of them here in Vermont, Dismas House. We have Valley Vista. Throughout the country, there are many. And is it true also with substance abuse that we should be looking at, or substance misuse, that we should be looking at non-congregate housing? So those are just some of the questions that came up based on your testimony.
Sure. Well, let me respond to all three of them then. The issue of people behaving badly in the community, that is an issue, that is a concern. That is not an issue that is, if that's occurring, and again, I don't want to make any judgments about what it is or isn't happening. If those things are happening, that issue has to do with how is supervision being handled, what is being done. You can't use that as a reason to say that the thing that most people increases the success of most people shouldn't be used. What has to be done is that there needs to be examined in terms of how are decisions being made about where people are placed. Are the right people being placed in the right places? And is the right type of supervision occurring? And again, I have no knowledge of those situations, so I'm not making a judgment. I'm just saying, if I were assessing what's happening, I would take a look at who those folks are. I would take a look at what their issues are. I would take a look at how they were referred, how those decisions were made. I would take a look at what were the wraparound kinds of programs or services that were being done in terms of supervision, in terms of programming. And that would help me understand one, whether it was an appropriate referral, or two, if it was, but something was missing, what needed to be added or fixed to do that. And yes, there are times when it's not an appropriate referral. I don't believe your department or any department I know of uses only single housing or scattered site housing. Most agencies, actually all agencies, use a combination of the two. So as I said earlier, I certainly wouldn't suggest that there should never be any congregate living settings, but the overall reliance on it for the majority of folks is not supported by the literature. And I guess I have to go further. One of the things that, because Vermont has done such a good job with the folks that they have, and that leaves you with people with the kind of needs. When you do look at, and I'm not speaking of Vermont, I'm talking about nationally. When you do look at the few studies where halfway houses or residential settings that did not follow the R&R perfectly had any success rate, what you find was that they were taking low-risk people. They were basically taking people that if they went home, they would have been fine. In fact, the Pennsylvania study suggests regardless of risk, they had a higher failure rate if they were in the halfway houses and they were better off going home. You don't find that in every study. What I'm saying is that there are multiple variables. There's no one answer. Your second question is congregate living for juveniles. Yeah, it's kind of a bad idea to lump a whole lot of juveniles with problems together and have them learn from each other how to be better at it. So yes, I would say, Senator, that should probably be reviewed. Keep in mind a couple of things. I'm talking about what the literature tells us. I'm not speaking specifically about the Vermont program or what you're doing there. But what we know is that having large congregate living settings for juveniles is a bad idea. Many states have closed down their juvenile centers, have developed smaller settings, have made sure, of course, they're separating males and females, have moved to either 2, 3, 4, 5-person facilities or even individual, and really try to limit to a major degree the putting juveniles into the system at all. But certainly if they are, they're keeping them out of the old juvenile detention center construct or concept. And you see this across the country. And again, there are places that still have the same building I looked at in 1985, but overwhelmingly, you're seeing among juveniles, regardless of the political persuasion of the state, you're seeing moves to sort of disaggregate them from the system, to not have them in large congregate settings, and to basically not teach them to become better at being delinquent or being adult. Again, is there ever a time when you shouldn't put folks together? I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that if you have a congregate setting for juveniles, it should be small. They should be assessed to determine that they're the appropriate mix instead of all thrown in because they happen to have the facility where they're all thrown in. It should only have to do with an issue of improving public safety. We send a lot of kids away for therapy. That's pretty much a loser for the most part when you look at the literature. So when you remove, that doesn't mean they don't need therapy. It's that sending them away to do that doesn't work. And it's not even the issue of the quality of the program. Sometimes it is. Other times it's simply the fact that you've now, when I say you, that we have now separated them in such a way that, like when I was really doing this work in the field, it wasn't common that we would send people to contiguous states. And what would happen is that there would then be no contact between them and the family, or limited. There'd be no work with the family. The kid would be off somewhere for a year or two. No matter how good the program was, they came back and it would fall apart. So those are my responses to that. The third issue is substance use programs. So the problem is substance use programs are not a one thing. So when we talk about a substance use program, we know that there are, first of all, are multiple levels of substance misuse, right? Starting at a very low level, going all the way up to substance dependence. And we know that there are multiple levels of care needed. And so at the highest level of care, you're talking about hospitalization. At the second to highest level of care, you're talking about some type of residential setting. Once you get below that, although residential settings are used, that they are often not used specifically because clinically that's a need for that. So one of the problems that you see in a lot of states is that people use, for example, sober houses for people who actually need residential treatment or need hospital-based treatment. And so when you have people who need that, you know, if you go to a hospital, it's going to be congregated. If you go to a residential treatment program, which is hospital-like, but not a hospital, then those folks, you know, they do need that. And they need to be there for a period of weeks, typically. And then they could sort of move down, they would titrate down, and they would move to whether that's a sober house or an independent living setting, et cetera. The real problem in substance use, when you look at this across the country, is that too often there's a mismatch between what the diagnostic need of the individual is and what the program is that's used for that need. And so the issue is matching. So that's a long way of saying, yes, senators, sometimes with substance use, there needs to be some type of residential programming. What has to be done in a much better way, and I suspect this is true in Vermont, but I don't know that, and I want to be clear. What I know from the 49 other states that I visited in my lifetime is that very often there's a tremendous mismatch, and we routinely put higher need individuals in programs that are designed for lower need individuals, and they fail in those programs. And to be honest with you, I've also seen a number of situations in certain states where they overuse residential treatment, the second to highest level, because they believe everybody with a substance use need must go to residential treatment, which the research also does not support. So I hope that responded to those three questions in a reasonably sensible way.
David, that's all very helpful, you know, but I also think part of the, particularly with substance misuse, there's a tendency on the part of the courts. The lawyer for the defendant says, my client is willing to go to treatment, and they off he goes to Valley Vista, whether that's what he needs or doesn't need. And I you know, there's that disconnect too within the system. And then you're correct, there is abject failure, comes back to court, having failed at Valley Vista. Now the judge gets fed up, puts him in jail. I mean, that's not an atypical type of case.
Sadly,
It's
that
not
is
just
true.
the Department of Corrections placing people in the wrong places.
No, absolutely, Senator. Sadly, that's true in many places, that the determination by the court is not based on good evaluation information. It's based on either a gut feeling or a plea bargain, you know, a statement made by the attorney and the client. And so you do see those mismatches as well. One of the things that we did recommend in Vermont is sort of, you're already doing some of this, but improved pretrial assessment to be able to get that to the judge, so the judge has that additional information as he or she is balancing the recommendations that are coming from, whether that's the prosecution or the defense bar, in terms of what it is they're saying.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Senator Baruth, and I know that Senator Lyons had her hand up and has gone over to Elcar, so hopefully she will be back. Senator Baruth.
Thank you, Mr. Demora. I have a question about resources. And, you know, I take your point about the science and the literature, and I haven't reviewed any of that. So what I'm trying to do is resolve what seems like a contradiction in my own mind. So in speaking about congregate setting, you said that the literature suggests that they fail because there's not enough qualified staff, not enough resources being the reason for that. Then in terms of talking about the scattered housing, you said the science suggests that that works because they have supports built around them in their new settings. Now, in terms of economies of scale, that seems counterintuitive, that we would, when we're able to aggregate people and use less staff to provide services, we don't have enough money, but we do have enough money to provide staff to individuals scattered around, which in any other context, for instance, education, that would be determined not to make sense, and we would look for a larger economy of scale. So my question to you is, if we move to scattered settings and we're looking for qualified support staff built around the people in them, why, if you could just explain why we wouldn't wind up in a situation where we're underfunding because we need more people rather than less in this new model. Does that make sense? I can't see.
Yes, I'm sorry. It makes sense, although there's an error in the conceptualization. And so let me try to explain that. So the first issue and the problem with any of these shorter term discussions is, leaving out various fine points, et cetera. To be clear, with few exceptions, there are always more failures in congregate living settings. So I don't want to sort of suggest that there's such a thing as a perfect congregate living setting. But there are congregate living settings that, for reasons of public safety, et cetera, or reasons of actual severity of the individual, what you see, that's issue one. Issue two is the issue of funding. The point of, and I believe you'll hear from other people about this, but the point is that with a congregate setting, in terms of the resource issue you mentioned, what you end up having is that has to be completely paid for by the department, for example, and they are not accessing programming that already exists in the community. One of the things that we have been doing with AHS in terms of looking at how they're doing this is to help folks understand that a correctional client is not a client only of corrections, that they are also a client of the Department of Mental Health. They are also a client of the substance use treatment programming. Sorry, I just blanked out the name, I apologize. That they're also a client of the folks that do housing, that they're also a client of DCF. So what happens in many states is that the Department of Corrections creates a shadow system that tries to do everything through the Department of Corrections, which costs more money and which is not as effective, because we also know that when people utilize community-based services, they come out better, they do better than when they use those only residential services. And so again, for example, in one of the places that I ran, we had our own substance use person, we had our own mental health person, I live in a resource-rich area, and in fairness, not all places in Vermont are resource-rich, and I by no means, I understand that. But having said that, we, to use that as an example, had created a shadow system that fundamentally wasn't as effective as the people doing all the big thinking about what to do in the systems of mental health and the systems of substance use, et cetera. So the idea is not that the department then has to, the departments, because this is not a model that's Vermont only, then have to, now pay all these other folks. It's an issue of, just like I can access my community mental health center, if that's what's local or whatever it is that happens to be in a place, so can that individual. As opposed to now my contracting with a separate person to specifically do that, who's not part of that larger system, that individual deserves to have access to as well. In some real rural states, I did a lot of work in Wyoming. One of the problems that we had there was, I think, one of the things you're talking about, which is there were large swaths of land where there were no programming. And so part of what that was developed there was a combination of increased telemedicine and transportation. They actually funded a transportation person to be able to take folks to the various treatment programs. And the cost of that was much less than developing those other services. So it's not a one-to-one comparison.
That's a great point. And so my just quick follow-up would be, so does the model that you're talking about and that the department is moving toward, does that advocate moving money into these, in essence, you're talking about shifting from this shadow wraparound network, which you see as unnecessary, to using existing services like AHS. Does that call for moving funds into those services to avoid swamping them? Because we hear all the time that those are underfunded systems.
Yeah. Absolutely. One of the things that we did in an earlier phase was that we advocated for additional dollars to be put into the mental health and substance use services. Both the governor's budget and the legislature did move that forward, and it sits with AHS proper, which allows them to look at where things are, where the needs are, and to be able to put additional funding in particular areas or services who are getting that influx of individuals in order to provide those services. I do not want to mislead you and suggest that the amount of funding so far is enough, but it is a wonderful start. And if you get the outcomes that you would be looking for, that we would be hoping for, right, which is less people involved in the prison setting, that will allow you to then reinvest future dollars from that into improving those systems further. It's always better to, to be honest or to be blunt, it's always better to try to improve systems that keep people out of prison than to increase the size of the prison setting.
Great. Thank you very much.
So we have another question, Representative Wood.
Thank you. Mr. Demore, I'm struck by the similarities in what you're suggesting around the efficacy of community services for justice-involved individuals with the similarities of the disability movement over the last 4 decades, in terms of moving out of congregate institutional settings to more individualized, smaller settings. And in fact, in Vermont, we have done a lot of that and have eliminated institutional settings. And we've actually found them to be more cost-effective, individualized settings to be more cost-effective, more integrative for the individual into their communities, and exactly what you just spoke of, accessing the community resources that are available to everybody else. Now, again, here in Vermont, those are not always available in plentiful supply, and we continue to have work to do on that. But so is the research that you were speaking of, does it draw upon the disability movement previously, or is it just sort of something that has been separately identified in the corrections area now?
No, actually it does. It did start with, so back in the dark ages, my career actually started in the disability area, in the area of working with folks who were differently able and in those residential and congregate settings and hospital settings. So I'm just sort of chuckling about a little bit about all of that. But the fact is, when you look at the current research, it did build upon the original research that grew out of the old social role valorization or normalization work and moving out of that. It was then followed up by folks in mental health, and it has been it is slowly, and I do mean this, slowly being reviewed or being adopted in terms of substance use, and the ASAM criteria has done a lot to help people disaggregate people with substance use issues. And then lastly, it's being done by the criminal justice system. And I mean this a little tongue in cheek, but routinely criminal justice systems do tend to be the last in terms of sort of where the research is and where they move. It takes a long time. It takes everybody a long time. It takes, on average, it takes medical people 10 to 12 to 13 years to move forward. It takes criminal justice systems often about 20. So there's always a little bit of a lag. So yes, it began with that, and it has been built on that over the years in terms of the research, looking at all of that, and one by one, what you're seeing is systems understanding that creating different systems for people doesn't improve their stability in the community. It just doesn't work. That's why the housing work has changed to rapid rehousing and housing first and all of that. And then last but not least, about the cost effectiveness, people misunderstand how expensive failure is and how much of the money of our money gets wasted because we create responses that aren't as effective as they could be. And again, in all these cases, it's not bad people. And in all these cases, it doesn't mean that there aren't certain times that people need to be in certain settings, but those need to be seen as the exceptions and not the norm, if you will.
Thank you.
So I'd like to transition now to the Department of Corrections. I'm looking at our time and we're bumping up against the next item on our schedule. So Commissioner Baker, welcome. It's so good to see you in person. Yes, yes, it's great. Welcome back.
Thank you. It is a bit strange walking in here.
Mm.
Good morning. My name is Jim Baker. I'm the interim commissioner of corrections. And I have some of my staff with me today, in particular the staff that has worked on this effort, taking the guidance from David and the Council of State Government to where we are today. What I thought I would do, and unless the committee feels different, is I just kind of want to bring us back to how we got to where we are and how we did that inside corrections. And then I thought I would offer you Emily Higgins, who can give you an update to where we are 15 days into these new contracts. The work that's being done is incredible. And it's innovative, and it's spurred other innovation inside corrections as a result of that. And so I think, just as a reminder, from where we sit at corrections and where I sit, I walked in here in January of 20. As a reminder, one of the first things I heard about is the failure of the housing inside corrections. First thing I heard about. Second thing I heard about is the work that we're doing with Justice Reinvestment 2. In fact, the first meeting I came to, when I got cornered in the hallway by some folks about housing, was the Justice Reinvestment Working Group. And I'll take you back to that meeting. That meeting, we talked about housing, and we talked about the guidance coming from CSG on Justice Reinvestment 2, and how we needed to do a better job with our housing models inside corrections. And there's a couple comments that David made that I think are spot on. We are not resource rich in Vermont. And I know there's concerns about things such as the designated agencies struggling to fill positions. And you're going to hear about staffing and corrections this afternoon. We're struggling. Everybody's struggling in this environment. That doesn't mean, as a commissioner of corrections, I'm going to sit back and say, well, geez, we're struggling. Well, guess we'll figure this out when we're not struggling on staffing anymore. The only way I know to do that is what I refer to from my police days, which is force multiply. And David is touching on something. The innovation that has sprung off of the work from the theory of change. And I don't want to have to walk you through the theory of change again today. I think Rachel Feldman, my principal assistant, provided you with those documents. But we did a theory of change. We took the guidance from the Center for State Government, and we took a look at the science and the research behind it. And we came up with a theory of change on how we're going to move towards a new model of housing. And the science and the directions that we got from working with CSG is that exactly what David talked about. That congregate housing has less success than individual scattered housing sites. And so why don't we want to be successful? That's where we moved as a result of that. Here's the other thing it's done. And I think, Senator, to your point, sir, that you were asking earlier, there's a working group inside AHS now being driven by Deputy Secretary Jenny Samuelson that has pulled together every department in AHS, and we've been meeting on a weekly basis. And we're looking at two pilot projects in the state. And the reason why I'm going to get into this is because the housing is not just a one-off. I want to put it in context of what we're doing inside corrections to deal with the folks that we supervise in the community. And as we move towards a more robust community corrections model, you got to put it in context with the other stuff that we're doing. We're moving from a catch you, send you back to jail, to a supportive, we want to help you in the community model. Matter of fact, the training that's coming up that we're doing with the help and guidance of David and the folks at CSG is going to focus on our field workers, probation and parole, community corrections officers, moving them to a whole new mindset of how we're going to manage the population in the community. That's the focus. So let's go back to AHS for a minute. We sat down and we were taking a look at a model project in Burlington. The highest risk people, and let me take that back. I shouldn't say the highest risk, and I think Dal Crook would correct me. I misspoke. We're taking a look at the population that's the most difficult for our staff to manage. In many cases, they have personality disorder challenges. They burn through their support systems in a hurry. They drive our staff crazy. Our staff gets burned out. They can't deal with them anymore. So we picked 30 cases and we brought in those 30 cases into the working group inside AHS. Guess what? 29 out of the 30 were already engaged in the Vermont Critical Care Initiative. Let that set in for a minute. Okay, we're already dealing with these folks somewhere else. And so what we're doing now is marshaling the resources inside AHS to better manage that population to have better outcomes. And we're going to move it further. So if they're coming out of our jail system, we're going to move it further back into the jail system. So you all know when you go to see a clinician or a doctor, what's the first thing that you're looking for? Is a relationship with your provider that you can trust that person. In many cases, when we release people into the community and we're trying to get them into working with a clinician or a medical person in the community, they have no relationship with them. And so part of the model that we're working on in Burlington is going to integrate the Vermont Critical Care Initiative into the care of those individuals. And we're going to marshal our resources collectively inside AHS to model that, to manage that population and figure out what the results are. And I'll touch on again what David said. You know, I think sometimes we forget just how expensive it gets when something bad goes wrong. And, you know, I'll end my comments by saying this, is that, you know, you all know what my background is. I wasn't in corrections. It's been a wild ride, to say the least, for the last 19 months. One of the things that has struck me is corrections is put in this position all the time of creating policies and programs. So in this case, we're talking about housing. It's at the macro level. You have to create a program that's wide enough and has enough grit to it that you can pick up the majority of the folks that are out there. The problem is you can always pick out cases where that macro development of a program didn't work. So the reason why I make this statement is because this is why it's so important. What we're doing inside AHS right now to try to marshal resources, wrap them around individuals with the housing model that we have put in place to see if in fact we have better outcomes. There's no promises here. You know, we deal with a very difficult population that have a lot of challenges in life. So there are no guarantees where we go with that. But I wanted to put this in context, and I certainly will offer up, Madam Chair, if you're so inclined, that Emily can brief you on where we are 15 days into the contracts. You know, I think the figure is we have 68% of the housing squared away already. That's 15 days into it. So I'm going to stop there and offer opportunities for questions, but I just wanted to give you the perspective, and I wanted to put it in context that this housing effort is not a one-off effort. It's embedded inside a strategy of where we're moving inside corrections. So with that, I'm going to stop and respect the time limits that you have, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. I think one thing that resonates is the folks that are reentering from corrections or under your supervision are also involved in other systems,
Absolutely.
other programs within the Agency of Human Services, of which Department of Corrections is a part of Human Services. And it seems as if those needs and programs that the offenders need, people have been looking to corrections to provide those services when they're already in the system within the Agency of Human Services. So this is an attempt, I believe, to bring all the partners together because they're already dealing with either that person offender directly or their families. They're already in the system
Correct.
somewhere.
Correct. Yeah, and I'll end it on a little bit of whining here for a minute, but I think it's a valid point, which David made. You're 100% right, Madam Chair, that it was always on corrections to deal with that issue. And guess what? When there was a failure, it's corrections' fault. And corrections is not the answer to the majority of these problems. It's got to be a collective effort, a wraparound services, and the housing that we've done is just within that context of the bigger shift that we're trying to make culturally inside corrections when it comes to better managing the population in the community.
So we have some questions. Representative Shaw.
May I ask
Senator
a
Lund-
question?
Eh,
Yeah, no, I'm sorry I had to leave for a little. Sorry I had to leave for a little bit. I went to Elcar and came back. But everything that the commissioner is saying is absolutely spot on. It's a bit of a frustration when we see Department of Corrections trying to reinvent programs that exist already and then fit those into the existing agency. So it is extremely helpful to have work going on, but I look at it as a continuum of care where there are the more extensive needs for folks perhaps who are coming out of corrections or being assessed before they are adjudicated. And then there are others who are in the community seeking help. So it's a long, it's a large continuum. The housing piece that we talked about earlier was, for me, it really established some guidelines and criteria that we can look at in terms of pre-housing assessment of folks, where they fit into the current system, what more do we need? So there's a lot here that is happening, I think, administratively, but I think it's something that both health and welfare and human services and institutions and judiciary are going to have to spend some time thinking about. And this is the start right here. So just to comment, I just think the direction is a good direction to be headed. The one glitch I see is how we deal with our kids. And the comment that struck me was that sending children outside of the state for treatment is not effective. That's something that we really need to talk about. And then the co-housing piece with kids that we're in the middle of, that also needs to have some attention. I won't go on.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. So let's go to Senator Sears and then Representative Shaw.
I'll be very brief. Commissioner, and you alluded to it, but how do we make these changes when, at least in my district where you live, the local designated agency is down 4 clinicians, and I don't think they have that many. And with that, that worries me as we make these changes, that the local agencies that are charged with dealing with these offenders in conjunction with the Department of Corrections aren't able to provide those services. That's, and I understand you're having that AHS look at the whole thing, but it really worries me.
Well, Senator, I guess my response to that is that I don't think that's anything new. You know, as a road trooper in Bennington County in 1978 and 80, it was the same issue then. All I can say is that my comment about sitting back and waiting to move to that next generation of what we need to do, we're always going to be talking about staffing. I mean, we're always going to be talking about it. And so from my experience, the only way to deal with this, and I'll draw on my experience as the chief in Rutland. How did we stand up Project Vision? We stood it up by marshaling resources and force multiplying, and taking all the resources that are in the community and force multiply. That's the concept we're following. And I am concerned just as you are. And you'll hear my testimony this afternoon. I'm concerned about our staffing in our facilities. Staffing is a challenge. but I don't want staff to stop innovating and being creative. And try to use staffing as an excuse not to be creative on how to solve these problems. That's where I'm at, sir.
Well, all I ask is that you take back to the committee working at AHS that there's a lot of communities lacking the resources that are needed to
I hear you,
deal with
sir.
the folks.
I hear you, sir.
Representative Shaw?
Thank you, Senator Sears, for asking that question, because that's has been a concern of mine for quite a while, that the services available, we're running the pilot at Chittenden County now, which is good, because we've learned over the years Chittenden County has the most services available to the population up there. And I'm hoping that as you look at this, you factor in the rest of the state, areas that don't have those kinds of services, areas in the Northeast Kingdom, Southwestern Vermont, that we just don't have those services available to us, and what it's going to take to stand those services up to make this program successful.
Right.
So I'm hoping that you'll look at that. So my other question is a little more of a softball.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, okay. I was wondering what's the mix of the folks you have in the pilot now? You have 30 folks, 29 successes, male, female. Don't care about the crime, the crimes that have been committed, but are you also bringing in a portion of the women's population in this?
So I'm not saying that we're successful yet out of those 29 out of 30, but it was just to demonstrate early on in the conversation inside HS, it was to demonstrate the point that in many cases, who we're dealing with are already being touched by someone inside HS. You know, and it can be as basic as receiving Medicaid, correct? I mean, so I didn't mean it to represent that. I will tell you that in the conversations, there is a heavy focus on the women's population in Chittenden County. But I also want to make another point about your home county of Rutland and Caledonia County, St. Johnsbury. We're also doing the Focused Deterrence Project. It's focused in Rutland and it's focused in Caledonia County. So we're innovating with other ideas as well as this focus that we have inside AHS. Now, the Focused Deterrence is on high-risk domestic violence folks. That's where that is going. It's the work we're doing with John Jay College, the National Center for Safe Communities. So it's not just us doing that one project focused on 30 people and see how it goes. We're doing other things as well as part of this bigger context about a more robust community corrections model.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Senator Hooker?
Thank you. My question was similar to what Representative Shaw was talking about and Senator Sears. We know that there's a lack of resources and staff in the agencies, but also in the housing stock. And you know this from Rutland, especially having a severe shortage. And I'm just curious to know, and maybe DLC will, or BGS will talk about that more, just to make sure that the successes that we're having are not just located, as Representative Shaw indicated, in Chittenden County.
No doubt. Remind people that I live in Bennington County, so I am in the forgotten county and state. I've been there since 1978, so I'm well aware of how counties can get forgotten about. But to your point, I'm gonna let Emily come up in a minute. Folks have no more questions for me, and I don't want to steal her thunder. But we have 138, 63% of the funded apartments are already in place. I know this has been a concern. I heard it loud and clear early on about you're not going to find apartments, but the partners we're working with have incredible relationships with landlords, and we're leveraging that. So I'm going to let Emily talk a little bit more about that. I'm not dodging the question, Senator, but I'm able to misquote something that's not accurate, and I'll have to come back after the staff whispers in my ear that I had it wrong. So if I have no more questions, Madam Chair, I would offer up Emily Higgins to talk to you about where we are.
That's great. Thank you.
Good morning,
Good morning,
everyone.
thank you.
I'm Emily Higgins. I'm the Corrections Housing Administrator in the Department of Corrections. And I have a 20-year career in affordable housing and homelessness at all different levels. So I do bring that background to the work that we've done in corrections over the past year around trying to better match the type of programs we're funding to successfully reintegrate folks into their communities. So would you like me to just dive in? Do you want me to?
Dive in and do it quickly?
Yes.
I'm just concerned a little bit about
Absolutely.
time with some of the others and trying to manage here.
Sure. I can say that in state fiscal year 22, which started 15 days ago, we have 15 grantees now providing 22 more units of housing than we did last year through DOC. We have shifted substantially towards scattered site apartments away from congregate housing. We've gone from 40% scattered site apartments to 80% of our portfolio statewide. And what that means is that people are able to live locally. We're serving counties we've never served before. People can be close to their families and natural supports. They are actually reintegrating with their community as opposed to living in a sort of an enclosed congregate setting. We did do the research, and on our website, we do have recommended reading, which lists out many of those resources around what does work for helping people successfully reenter. We engaged in an open request for proposals process, competitive bidding. We had a cross-agency of human services team that reviewed all of the applications and scored them. And we did collaborate with other agency departments, Department of Mental Health, the Department for Children and Families around mutual grantees and what was the best way to meet the needs of the people we're all serving together. We did do some really collaborative work around housing of youth with the Department for Children and Families, youthful offenders. And what we found is, as the commissioner said, we have excellent providers who are working really hard at acquiring new apartments. And even though we're adding 112 apartments, we only have 80 left to lease up at this point, 15 days into the new year. So 30% of our portfolio will get leased up in the next few months. But we're finding that people are getting stably housed in the new programs and integrating into the existing resources.
Questions? Questions for folks? So I think one thing that may be important as this gets rolled out from the department over the next few months, might be good just to keep us abreast on how this is playing out. It might also be good to know who your providers, partners are in this, because I think one thing we need to understand and have clarity on, if scattered housing, I think what we have in our minds is it's just someone in their individual apartment or individual living situation and they're on their own. And what I'm picking up, it's different than that.
Thank you. Can I respond to that? That's an excellent point. We do plan to issue a press release tomorrow, I believe, with detailing all of the providers that we're funding, how many beds they're funding, where they're providing services, and links to their websites. We also have a public listing on our website now on the Department of Corrections that includes all of those details, so that is available. I also want to be clear that more than half of the funding that we're providing to these 15 grantees is to support staffing. So we are supporting more than 50 full-time equivalent staff to support all of the individuals who are reentering their communities. That's about a one staff person for every 5 participant ratio. So it is intensive supports that those staff will make sure people are getting connected to services, getting case management, employment support, life skills, substance use, mental health treatment, all of the things that people need, but tailored to their individual needs and goals.
So you having a time frame for a check-in to make sure that your goals are, your outcomes are matching up with your goal?
Well, we do require that organizations report on outcomes quarterly. I think it will take some time to compare those outcomes compared to last year to this year. I don't know that in quarter one, we'll know for sure how things are working out, but I know that we are working hard to get all the new options set up and to provide lots of training and support to our grantees around trauma-informed care and supportive housing, and really leading in this area.
I know the commissioner had his hand up and I interrupted.
Yeah, as soon as I get comments on that press release, we have plans to set that press release off. So you'll have the list.
Just a quick question. On the housing side of things, and maybe on any of the other supportive services, do you know to what extent any of the ARPA-funded resources that are out there in the community are having an impact on the availability? So I'm making an assumption that it is helping in terms of your getting access to some of those things that might not have been available had we not had that funding. Is that an accurate assumption?
Yes, I think the ARPA funding is definitely helping keep people in their apartments and pay arrearages, and the eviction moratorium has kept people stably housed. That is ending. So, there's a lot of transition going on. I think that the benefit that we have in DOC is that we're funding some of that rental assistance for these agencies so that they are able to act quickly and partner individually with landlords. And we're also going to have a landlord risk pool to help mitigate financial risk for landlords in housing those coming out of corrections. So that incentivizes them to partner with those agencies. There is a distinction in that those on furlough are not considered literally homeless, and so they do not qualify for rapid rehousing, for example, funding. So that's why we do need to have our resources in addition for those in our care and custody.
Thank you.
So those on furlough are not considered homeless because they're still deemed to be incarcerated because furloughs is an extension of the incarcerated wall.
Correct.
Okay.
They're serving their sentence in the community,
Yes.
essentially.
Madam
Yes.
Chair, I just have a quick question. Do you have any, can you see into the future, I guess, as to what the need is going to be within the next few months with people coming out of, finishing their sentencing and the need that we'll see as we go forward?
We do keep close tabs on those and, close to being released from incarceration. And that's why we've planned to expand our options and make them more flexible. We do release planning with all of those individuals. What part of what's changed with justice reinvestment is that we have fewer conditions on where people can live when they come out. And so there is some flexibility there, and COVID changed everything as well. So it's a little hard to have that crystal ball exactly, but we did do an analysis of the case plans and the case loads of each local district and the need for housing based on that projected forward. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I'm just thinking in terms of the broader spectrum with people who are homeless, people who have come out of hotels, for instance, and are in need. How is that working? Where is that balance happening with regard to DOC and the need that you have?
I'm working hard to bridge that communication between the affordable housing continuum of care community and the Department of Corrections, because I come from that world. And so I'm sharing those resources not only with our probation and parole staff in the field, but also with community partners. And many of those partners also work in that field. So there's some good overlap and understanding there.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is
Thank
helpful, and
you.
I'm sure this conversation will continue. It's not going to go away.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. So is there anything else on this particular issue? I think it wraps up this issue, and we can move on quickly to the next item on our agenda, which was some questions about the Women's Correctional Facility, the Chittenden facility, that came up at our last meeting about some of the physical concern and issues that were related in a white paper a number of years ago when the women were first there. We thought it would be good to have BGS come in and just give us a brief update in terms of maintenance work that's been done at the facility, the status of the maintenance in the facility, and an opportunity for members to ask BGS some questions. So Commissioner, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here today. Also excited to be one of the folks diving into this hybrid world of testifying. So thank you very much. My name is Jennifer Fitch. I'm the BGS Commissioner. I was appointed in January of this year by the governor. Prior to that, I've been at BGS 3 years as the Deputy Commissioner. So I've been there since 2017. I'm an engineer. So the good news is that it's a great place to be for my background. So with respect to testimony today, what I was asked to testify was on the showers and concerns over mold. Happy to answer any additional questions that I can, but if not, Joe Asia, the Director of Design and Construction, is here with me today, and he should be able to fill in the gaps. So just so folks know, the way that it works with correctional facilities is that BGS is in charge of maintenance of the building and the building systems, and DOC is in charge of custodial and cleaning of the facilities. And so we have a partnership in terms of how we maintain and operate the buildings between ourselves and DOC. With respect to preventative maintenance, we steam clean the lines twice a year. That's just something we do as part of our preventative maintenance, and that is the sewer line. So we steam clean the sewer line 2 times a year in Chittenden, and that involves quite a bit of logistics with DOC. Because in order to steam clean the lines, we basically have to start at the end of the line and work our way all the way out of the facility, if that makes sense, down that sewer line. And so to do that, we have to coordinate with DOC to basically move inmates out of certain locations within the building, right? So that we can steam clean the lines and get that work done in a safe manner. And so we do that twice a year. In terms of concerns over mold, what will happen if we get a concern over mold is DOC will contact us, they'll put in a work order, and then we will hire a consultant to go in. We're using Limelight right now. The consultant goes in and they do mold testing to determine whether or not mold is actually there. So 2 of the units, Alpha was one of the units that we had a concern from DOC over mold recently. We sent in Limelight, there is no mold. They actually just found that the grout is turning a greenish color, which over time, lots of people showering and using products, it's going to change the color of the grout. Nonetheless, we're going to go in there with Limelight and we're going to clean and restore the bathrooms. That means that we basically pressure wash them, and then operations and maintenance will go in. They will remove any broken tile, they'll put in new tile, and they will regrout the bathroom. With respect to Delta, we heard about that last week, brought Limelight in. There is mold, but it is not airborne. So lots of times what will happen is the water basically and that grout sort of decays over time, and the water now can go underneath the tile, right? And that's a perfect place for mold to form. But when it's wet and it's underneath something, it's not up in the air and you're not breathing it in. So again, in that case, we're going to have Limelight come in. They will remove the tile. They will remove any materials that have mold in them. They will replace them. They will clean the area, and then again, we will go in and we will replace tile and regrout the showers. So with respect to showers, which is what I was asked to come in and testify today, that is how we both maintain them, and we're preventative throughout the year by steam cleaning those lines, as well as how we coordinate with DOC when there's a concern over mold.
So when you steam clean the sewer lines, do you find foreign material in that sewer line or not?
So that is a challenge for us, and that is a great question, Madam Chair. People in theory should be putting the right products down the right systems, right? Trash in theory should go into the trash. Unfortunately, sometimes things that should not be flushed down the drain are, including food particles. And when those food particles sit in the lines, it's a great place, right, for bacteria and other things to grow. And so that is why we go ahead and we steam clean those lines. But it is true, people flush things down the lines they shouldn't do. We get backups. People are putting food down the lines. They shouldn't be doing that. It creates an environment for bacteria to grow. We do coordinate all of that, obviously, with DOC, and we do try to work carefully with them to work with the inmate population to be only placing the things where they should be going in terms of how we should be doing waste removal.
Because we have at some of our facilities what we call a muffin eater
That's right.
that will eat, chew up products that are not food.
That is
It
correct.
could be sheets, it could be towels, it could be clothing, utensils, could be a lot. And we do not have a muffin eater at the Chittenden facility, correct? Or
That I do
we?
not know. I would have to yield to Joe on that one.
Joe Andrew, BGS, that is correct. We do have a trash rack that does collect that, but that, whether it's actually a muffin monster or an auger monster, which actually is a fine sieve that collects the stuff and puts the trash bucket, it's outside of the facility. So where the backups do happen are the lines to the toilet and getting to that trash rack and go to the auger monster.
Welcome to the world of BGS.
That's right.
And corrections, when you really start looking at the internal workings of corrections, you find some things you have a hard time comprehending. Questions? As I know, some folks were concerned about what they were hearing, wanted more update. Hope that helps give folks some information to go back.
One of the challenges and maybe why you might have been hearing about it was because during COVID, DOC did an excellent job, right, of trying to minimize transmission of COVID. But that also meant that BGS staff had limited access into the facilities as such. And so unfortunately, what that meant is that it was challenging to get in there and do some of these preventative maintenance activities like steam cleaning the line. So there was a concern sometime, I would say, late winter, early spring. But Commissioner Baker and I worked together to resolve that, to make sure that staff, BGS staff, could get in and steam clean the lines in Chittenden.
Representative Shaw and then Senator Brewer.
Thank you.
So, Commissioner, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome. Yeah, I believe you're talking today specifically about Chittenden. And I'm making the assumption that you have the same protocols at all of our other facilities. And as a quick thought, is there any comparison to the issues at the other facilities as the issues that keep cropping up in Chittenden?
That is an excellent question. I will yield to Joe on this potentially, but we use the same preventative maintenance at all of our facilities, right? We have a schedule and sequence of certain things we do, like boilers or HVAC or filter change outs, things like that, right? We have things on a certain schedule. So yes, we do all these same things at all of our facilities. In terms of during COVID, the only one that I personally rose to my level as a concern was Chittenden. There may have been other issues that just didn't rise to my level.
And it rises to your level on a request from DOC.
That is correct.
Senator Brewer.
So I'm not sure where to direct this, maybe to the chair, maybe to BGS. I looked quickly last night at this and assumed that part of what we would be getting is an update on where we were around design for a new facility. So if that is not on the agenda today, or if no one can enlighten us on that, I'm wondering if we can include it in our agenda for next time.
That might, because you've just started.
Right. I mean, I can give you a quick soundbite if that's
Just a
okay.
quick soundbite.
Very
and it
quick
would be
soundbite.
good to have that future time?
So we are moving into what's called the programming and planning phase. So essentially, we have been working really closely with DOC. We hired a consultant that was fantastic, by the way, that basically came in and took a look at our current correctional facilities and made recommendations for the future, meaning how many would we have? What types of facilities might we have? And they basically came out with a menu of options for the state, both the administration and the legislature to take a look at. Ultimately, we landed somewhere in the middle, which is a hybrid. So they basically were looking at one large giant correctional facility that covers everything, or what we have today, which is, correctional facilities throughout the state. In the end, we all kind of coalesced around a hybrid in between, some larger facilities, some smaller, as well as reentry facilities for men and women as well. So we have funding. We were allocated funding in the capital bill over the next 2 years to do planning and programming. It's like a giant puzzle if you think about it. So we can't just focus on the women, because we have to think about how does the women fit in with the men in all of our existing correctional facilities. So this next step is really going to be to look at how do those building blocks fit together, and then make recommendations on where these facilities should be sited, specifically the women's correctional facility and a new women's reentry facility. And so that's really the work that's going to be ongoing. And the only other snippet I'll add to that is this is also the requirements gathering phase as well. That's what you do in planning and programming. So we'll be working with DOC to determine what type of requirements do we need for the facility, which could include things like how much land do we need, right? Water, sewer needs, electrical needs, those kinds of things. And that way we can look at our existing portfolio of what we already have and does anything fit, right, within my buildings and grounds? Or if not, this is the requirements that I would need for a new piece of land. So those are the types of things that we'll be looking at in the next 12 to 18 months, Joe.
Thank you. Much appreciated. I just want to, every time we talk about the women's facility, I want to stress that for those inmates, for the people who are working with them from my county, it's a huge issue, and we're hoping for action sooner rather than later. I know this committee has pushed the timeline forward a little bit. I've been appreciative of that, but I want to just remind us.
I can speak for the House Corrections and Institutions Committee. We've been really trying to do this for the past 2 years. And we were pleased that this time there were enough partners that were willing to work with us to put in the funding and start the process. We've appropriated $500,000 for this particular year to do the planning and programming. And then there's another $1 million that's being put aside in the capital bill for FY23 to bring us to the next step. One thing I want to be very clear, when BTS says planning and programming has a different definition in BTS than what we're used to. Programming means, what do they need for land? What do they need for infrastructure? It's not the program of the programs that will be offered by DOC. That's a conversation that's also occurring in tandem at the same time here, but that is separate from the planning and programming that you hear BTS referred to.
Well said, Madam Chair.
Just want to make that clear. So we have a
Can
question.
I make a comment, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Thank you, and thank you, Commissioner Fitch, for clarity on where the planning is at this point, at least for the building. I just would like to add some enthusiasm for alacrity and moving forward as quickly as possible. I've been in the Senate a number of years, and I think many of those years have been spent discussing the needs, not just the site planning, but also the program needs for the women's prison. And I feel that we are way behind in the work. And this is not a criticism by any means of Buildings and Grounds or DOC. I think it's a criticism of ourselves for not taking a faster step forward, and having the funds available for capital planning and construction is critically important. But it's also important that we move forward on the type of planning that will help our those women who are incarcerated to move back into the community. So that is simply a comment, and thank you, Madam Chair, for your comment and clarity on the programming issue.
Any other questions, thoughts? So we will schedule time. Would you be ready for a little bit more in-depth conversation next month? Would that be too soon?
I'm going to look to Joe.
That would be too soon. We are working on drafting the request for proposal to go out. I hope by the end of next month it'll be out on the streets, but I will know more once we have the contract on board.
So maybe September?
And I'd also, Commissioner Baker is here in the room, and I just want to emphasize, right, that BGS designs and builds buildings based on the policy of the department or agency we serve. Why I say that is that while we are putting out an RFP, right, to hire an AE firm to do the planning and programming, DOC is very much already actively working on what does a new women's reentry facility look like, right? And then we will take our lead from them and design it accordingly. So it's really DOC that's setting the policy and how these buildings will function and the types of programs they will provide. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
You know, Madam Chair, I would suggest, I wouldn't oppose if you put us on
Right.
Okay.
the next month. And
Okay.
again, I want to steal Commissioner Fitz's thunder because she's gracious. Didn't mention that. She's joining our staff next Wednesday on a full trip to Maine to take a look at the.
Oh, good.
So I think, based on the conversations inside corrections around this, I'd like to come back in maybe next month, talk a little bit about at least what the conversations are around what we're thinking. Nothing solid. So we're starting to really think around ideas that are very heavy on the less on security. So I would like to come back.
That would be great. We'll schedule that, and BGS should also be in the room for that.
Happy to.
Yeah, and I want to be really clear. It's not BGS that has to take the initiative to do this. They cannot do anything unless the legislature appropriates the money for them to go forward. So it's on us as legislators to say, yes, we're doing this, and to put the money in our budget for them to do it. It's not BGS that will say, well, we're replacing the facility and we're going out for an RFP for a contractor. They cannot do that unless we, the legislature, appropriate the money. So it's on us to do this. I just want to be clear.
Yes, thank you, Madam
BGS
Chair.
Isn't the one saying yes or no on this. So anything else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
I know we're running a little late, but I really feel members of the committee need a break. So I'd like to take a very quick 5-minute, 10-minute break if we can. And if